My name is Sophia, and I'm 32 years old. Right now, I'm standing in my Manhattan penthouse looking down at the city lights twinkling like diamonds below. Just hung up the phone with my father, and honestly, I'm not sure if I'll ever speak to him again. 3 weeks ago, I made a decision that shocked my entire family. I cut off all financial support to my parents after one devastating dinner conversation. You see, success has a funny way of revealing people's true colors, especially when it comes to family. And sometimes the people who should be proudest of you are the ones who cut you down the deepest. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. Trust me, what happened next at that dinner table will leave you speechless. Let me tell you how a single dinner changed everything between us forever. 3 weeks ago, my life looked pretty different than most people my age. I'm the CEO of a fintech company that I built from absolutely nothing, and yeah, I've been blessed with success that even surprises me sometimes. My penthouse apartment in Manhattan costs more per month than most people make in a year. I drive a Tesla Model S that purrs like a kitten and costs more than a house in some states. My bank account has numbers that would make your head spin. But let me take you back to where it all started, because understanding my journey makes what happened at that dinner table even more painful. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a modest 3-bedroom ranch house with beige siding and a front yard that my dad mowed every Saturday morning without fail. My father, Richard, worked as an accountant for a local firm, crunching numbers and living by spreadsheets. My mother, Linda, taught third grade at the elementary school down the street from our house. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich either. We were solidly middle class, and my parents took pride in that stability. From the time I could walk, my father drilled into me the importance of saving every penny. He'd lecture me about compound interest while I tried to watch cartoons on Saturday mornings. When other kids got allowances, I got lessons about fiscal responsibility. When I wanted designer jeans in high school, Dad would drag me to Walmart and explain why their brand was perfectly adequate. Everything in our house was about being practical, sensible, and above all, cheap. I was the kid who got a full scholarship to Northwestern University because my parents made it clear that student loans were absolutely not an option. I worked 3 part-time jobs during college, lived on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, and graduated with honors while most of my classmates partied their way through 4 years. After graduation, I moved to New York with $800 in my checking account and a dream that felt impossible. Those first years in the city were brutal. I shared a studio apartment in Queens with 2 other girls sleeping on an air mattress in the corner. I ate dollar pizza for dinner more nights than I care to remember. But I was building something. I was learning the financial technology sector inside and out, networking with people who thought bigger than spreadsheets and savings accounts. When I finally launched my company 5 years ago, it was with my last $2,000 and a prayer. The first year nearly killed me. I worked 20-hour days, lived on coffee and determination, and watched my bank account hover dangerously close to zero more times than I could count. But slowly, painfully, beautifully, it started to work. Now my company processes millions of dollars in transactions daily. We've got offices in 3 cities and employees who look up to me like I hung the moon. Forbes featured me in their 30 Under 30 list 2 years ago. I've been invited to speak at conferences where tickets cost more than most people's monthly rent. But here's the thing that nobody talks about when you become successful. Your family doesn't always celebrate with you. My father, the man who raised me to be careful with money, seemed to get more and more uncomfortable with every milestone I reached. When I bought my first luxury car, he asked why I needed something so flashy. When I moved into a better apartment, he wondered aloud why I couldn't just live within my means. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been quietly supporting our family for the past 3 years. I'd been paying their mortgage every month, $2,500 that came directly from my business account. I covered their car payments, their insurance, their property taxes. When Mom needed dental work that their insurance wouldn't cover, I handled it. When Dad wanted to take Mom on a cruise for their anniversary guests, who funded that little getaway, I never wanted credit for it. I just wanted to give back to the people who raised me, even if their methods had been a little intense. I thought maybe, just maybe if I proved I could be successful and generous, Dad would finally see that his lessons about money had actually worked. I just applied them on a different scale than he'd imagined. That's what made me decide to plan something special for his 65th birthday. I wanted to show him that his daughter had made it, and I wanted to celebrate the man who'd pushed me to work harder than everyone else. I thought a fancy dinner would be the perfect way to honor him and maybe finally earn the approval I'd been chasing my entire life. The planning for Dad's birthday dinner consumed my thoughts for weeks. I wanted everything to be perfect, partly because I loved him, and partly because I was still that little girl seeking her father's approval. I made a reservation at Le Bernardin, one of the most prestigious restaurants in Manhattan. We're talking about a place where dinner for 6 would cost more than most people spend on groceries in 3 months. The wait list is usually 6 weeks long, but when you're a regular customer who tips well and never causes trouble, doors open a little easier. I spent hours selecting the perfect gift. After browsing through several high-end stores, I settled on a Rolex Submariner, the kind of watch that whispers success without shouting it. $15,000 for a timepiece might seem excessive to some people, but to me it represented everything I wanted to say to my father. Thank you for pushing me. Thank you for teaching me that hard work pays off. Thank you for being the foundation that I built my empire on. The week before the dinner, I called Mom to finalize the details. Linda's voice carried that familiar note of excitement mixed with anxiety that I'd grown up hearing whenever we did anything that stepped outside our normal routine. Sophia, honey, are you sure about this restaurant? Your father looked it up online and nearly choked when he saw the prices. I laughed, trying to keep things light. Mom, it's his birthday. Let me spoil you guys for once. I can afford it and I want to celebrate him properly. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear her choosing her words carefully. He's been in one of his moods lately, sweetheart. You know how he gets when he thinks people are being wasteful. Maybe somewhere a little more casual. That should have been my first warning sign. But I was determined to show Dad that his daughter had made it in the world, and that his lessons about working hard and saving money had paid off in ways he'd never imagined. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd be proud instead of critical for once. The night arrived with typical October crispness in the air. I chose my outfit carefully, a classic black dress that was elegant without being too flashy, paired with simple pearl earrings that Mom had given me for college graduation. I wanted to look successful, respectful, prosperous, but not ostentatious. I arrived at Le Bernardin 15 minutes early and was seated at our reserved table, a perfect spot with views of the restaurant's elegant interior, but private enough for family conversation. The ambiance was everything I'd hoped for: soft lighting, pristine white tablecloths, and the kind of hushed atmosphere that makes every conversation feel important. My family arrived exactly on time because Richard Parker was never late for anything in his life. Dad looked uncomfortable the moment he walked through the door, his eyes scanning the dining room like he was calculating the cost of every fixture and piece of artwork. Mom looked beautiful, but nervous, wearing the navy dress she usually reserved for church and special occasions. My younger sister Jessica, 28, and a high school teacher seemed excited but kept glancing at Dad's expression with concern. My brother Marcus, 25, and still trying to make it as a freelance graphic designer, was the only one who looked genuinely thrilled to be there. Fancy place, Soph, Marcus said, settling into his chair and immediately reaching for his water glass. I feel like I need to sit up straighter. Dad picked up the menu, and I watched his eyebrows climb toward his hairline as he scanned the prices. A simple appetizer cost more than he typically spent on an entire dinner for 2. The entrees were priced like small investments. I could see his jaw tightening with each page he turned. Jesus Christ, Sophia, he muttered under his breath, but not quietly enough that I couldn't hear him. $60 for fish. Mom kicked him under the table and shot him a warning look. Richard, it's your birthday. Relax. I tried to steer the conversation toward safer territory, asking Jessica about her students and Marcus about his latest design projects. For a few minutes, things felt normal. We laughed about Jessica's attempts to teach fractions to kids who couldn't sit still, and Marcus showed us his latest logo design on his phone. But I could feel Dad's discomfort radiating across the table like heat from a furnace. He kept looking around the restaurant, taking in the other diners with their expensive clothes and easy confidence. He ordered the cheapest entree on the menu and made a point of mentioning it was reasonably priced compared to everything else. When our waiter, a professional young man with impeccable manners, began describing the evening's specials, Dad interrupted him halfway through. Do you have anything that doesn't cost more than my mortgage payment? The silence that followed was excruciating. Our waiter handled it with grace, simply smiling and recommending a few of the less expensive options. But I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment, not because of the money, but because Dad was making this about cost instead of celebration. That's when I should have realized that no amount of success, no perfect restaurant, no expensive gift was going to change the fundamental difference between how he saw money and how I'd learned to see it. He would always view spending as losing, while I'd learned to see it as investing in experiences and relationships, but I pressed forward, determined to make the evening work. I had no idea that I was walking straight into the moment that would change everything between us forever. As our main courses arrived, I tried desperately to salvage the evening's mood. The food was incredible, each dish a work of art that justified every dollar of its price tag. I watched Mom's eyes light up as she tasted her sea bass, and Marcus practically moaned with pleasure over his duck confit. Even Jessica seemed to be relaxing into the luxury of it all. But Dad ate his salmon like it was a chore, cutting each bite with mechanical precision and chewing with the expression of a man calculating the cost per ounce. Every few minutes he'd make little comments under his breath about the highway robbery happening on our plates. I decided to pivot the conversation to something I thought would make him proud. So I've got some exciting news about the company, I said, setting down my fork and smiling at the family. We just closed a partnership deal with 3 major banks that's going to triple our revenue stream. Marcus whistled low. Damn, Sophia, that's incredible. Language, Marcus, Mom chided automatically, but she was smiling. That's wonderful, sweetheart. You've worked so hard for this. Jessica raised her wine glass. To my brilliant big sister who's conquering the world, one algorithm at a time. But Dad's reaction wasn't what I'd hoped for. Instead of pride, his expression grew more sour. Must be nice, he said, stabbing at his vegetables with unnecessary force. Making all that money while regular people struggle to make ends meet. The words hit me like a slap. Dad, I'm not taking money from anyone. I'm providing a service that helps people manage their finances better. I'm actually helping regular people. By charging them fees, they can't afford to access services they don't need, he shot back. It's all just another way to separate working folks from their hard-earned dollars. I felt my temper starting to flare, but tried to keep my voice level. That's not what we do at all. We're actually making financial services more accessible and affordable than traditional banks. Sure you are, he said with a bitter laugh. And I suppose that's why you need to live in a penthouse and eat at places like this, because you're helping the little guy. The rest of the table went silent. Mom was staring at her plate, clearly uncomfortable. Jessica was looking back and forth between Dad and me like she was watching a tennis match. Marcus had stopped eating entirely and was just sitting there with his mouth slightly open. I took a deep breath, trying to channel the patience I used in difficult business negotiations. Dad, I work hard for what I have. I've built something from nothing just like you taught me to do. The only difference is the scale. The scale? His voice was getting louder and other diners were starting to glance our way. The scale is the problem, Sophia. You've lost all sense of proportion, all sense of what really matters. What really matters, I could hear my own voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Working 20-hour days matters. Building something that employs 63 people matters. Being able to take care of my family matters. Take care of your family. Dad's laugh was harsh and bitter. You think throwing money around is taking care of family? You think showing off at fancy restaurants is what family needs? That's when he really started to unload. You know what I see when I look at this? He gestured around the restaurant with obvious disgust. I see someone who's forgotten where she came from. Someone who thinks money can buy, class can buy respect, can buy love. My heart was pounding, but I tried one more time to explain. I wanted to celebrate you, Dad. I wanted to show you how much I appreciate everything you taught me about working hard and building a future. This isn't building a future, he snapped. This is burning through money like there's no tomorrow. This is exactly the kind of wasteful show-off behavior that I spent 18 years trying to teach you to avoid. The irony was crushing me. The man who'd taught me to value hard work and financial security was now attacking me for the very success those lessons had created. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small wrapped box containing the Rolex. My hands were shaking slightly as I placed it in front of him. Happy birthday, Dad. I hope you like it. He looked at the box like it might contain a snake. The entire table held its breath as he slowly unwrapped it, his movements deliberate and careful. When he opened the velvet case and saw the watch, his face went through a series of expressions that I'll never forget. Surprise, shock, and then something that looked almost like disgust. How much did this cost? His voice was deadly quiet. That's not important, I said quickly. What matters is that I wanted to get you something special to show how much did this cost, Sophia? I swallowed hard. $15,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Other conversations in the restaurant seemed to fade away until all I could hear was my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Dad stared at the watch like it had personally offended him, then slowly, deliberately closed the box and pushed it back across the table toward me. What he said next changed everything between us forever. $15,000 for a watch? Are you insane? The words came out like bullets, each one hitting me square in the chest. But he wasn't done. Dad's voice dropped to a harsh whisper that somehow felt more devastating than shouting would have been. You're nothing but cheap, Sophia. Nothing but cheap. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. Of all the words he could have chosen, cheap was the one that cut the deepest. This man had spent my entire childhood drilling into me the importance of being careful with money, of avoiding waste, of finding value in simplicity. And now when I tried to honor him with something expensive, something that represented the success his lessons had helped me achieve, he was calling me cheap. Dad, I don't understand. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to show you how much I appreciate. He leaned forward, his eyes blazing with an anger I'd never seen before. You think throwing money around like confetti is appreciation? You think buying overpriced status symbols shows class? Mom reached across the table and placed her hand on his arm. Richard, please. People are staring. But he shook her off, his attention laser-focused on me. Let them stare. Maybe they need to see what happens when someone forgets their values completely. Jessica looked mortified, her face red with embarrassment. Marcus was staring at Dad like he'd never seen him before. But I couldn't focus on anyone else because Dad was still talking, each word landing like a physical blow. Real class is about restraint, Sophia. It's about knowing the difference between want and need. It's about understanding that just because you can afford something doesn't mean you should buy it. He picked up the watch box again and held it like it was contaminated. This isn't generosity. This is showing off. This is nouveau riche nonsense from someone who's forgotten where she came from. Nouveau riche. The phrase hit me like a slap across the face. Dad, I came from you. Everything I learned about working hard, about building something meaningful, I learned from watching you. Then you weren't paying attention, he said coldly. Because what I tried to teach you was the value of living within your means of being satisfied with enough instead of always reaching for more, more, more. That's when something inside me snapped. The little girl who had spent her entire life trying to earn his approval was suddenly gone, replaced by the woman who had built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. You want to know what's really cheap, Dad? My voice was steady now, controlled in a way that surprised even me. What's cheap is sitting in a restaurant that your daughter is paying for, complaining about every single thing on the menu. What's cheap is accepting a gift that costs more than most people make in 4 months and calling the person who gave it to you names. The color drained from his face, but I wasn't finished. You know what else is cheap? Letting your daughter pay your mortgage every month for the past 3 years and never once saying thank you. The silence that followed was absolute. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. Jessica's mouth fell open. Marcus just stared at me like I'd revealed the existence of aliens. What are you talking about? Dad's voice was barely audible. I'm talking about the $2,500 that comes out of my business account every month to cover your house payment. I'm talking about your car insurance, your property taxes, your homeowner's insurance. I'm talking about Mom's dental work last year and your anniversary cruise and that new roof you needed after the storm. I could see the realization dawning on his face, but I was too hurt and angry to stop. I've been quietly supporting this family for years because I thought that's what successful people did. They took care of the people they loved. But apparently, what I was really doing was enabling you to sit in judgment of me while living off the very success you seem to despise. Mom was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her cheeks. Sophia, honey, we had no idea you were doing all that. Of course you didn't, I said, still looking directly at Dad. Because I didn't want credit. I just wanted to help. I wanted to show my family that their sacrifices for my education had paid off, that the lessons about hard work had taken root, that I could be successful and generous. Dad's face had gone from red to pale to something approaching gray. I didn't know, he said quietly. But you should have wondered, I replied. You should have wondered how 2 people on a teacher's salary and an accountant's pension could suddenly afford all those extras. You should have wondered, but instead you just took it and criticized me every chance you got. I stood up from the table, my legs somehow steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. You called me cheap, Dad. You want to see cheap? I'll show you cheap. I pulled out my phone and right there in the middle of Le Bernardin, called my financial advisor. Hi, David. It's Sophia. I need you to cancel all the automatic transfers to the Parker account immediately. Yes, all of them. The mortgage, the insurance, everything. Cancel them tonight. I could hear Dad's sharp intake of breath, could see Mom's eyes widen in panic, but I wasn't done. Also, I need you to call the bank and let them know I'm no longer guaranteeing the line of credit on the Parker account. Yes, I understand they'll probably freeze it. That's fine. When I hung up, the table was so quiet, I could hear the conversation at the table next to us discussing wine pairings. Sophia, Mom whispered, please think about what you're doing. I looked at her, this woman who had sacrificed so much to give me opportunities, and felt my heart breaking. I have thought about it, Mom. I've thought about it every month when I write those checks. I've thought about it every time Dad criticizes my success. I've thought about it every time I try to share my good fortune and get lectured about fiscal responsibility instead of getting a simple thank you. I turned back to Dad, who looked like he'd been hit by a truck. You called me cheap, and you know what, you're right. It was cheap of me to think I could buy your approval. It was cheap of me to enable your criticism by making your life comfortable while you tore me down. And it was really cheap of me to keep trying to prove myself to someone who was never going to be proud of me no matter what I accomplished. I picked up the watch box and put it back in my purse. Happy birthday, Dad. I hope you enjoy paying for your own dinner. And with that, I walked out of Le Bernardin, leaving my family sitting at that expensive table, finally understanding exactly what my cheap generosity had been worth. The 3 weeks that followed were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Walking out of that restaurant had felt like stepping off a cliff, and the landing was harder than I'd expected. The call started the next morning. My phone rang at 7:30 a.m., and I knew without looking that it was Mom. "Sophia, sweetheart, please. You have to understand that your father didn't mean what he said. He was just overwhelmed by the expense, by the restaurant, by everything. You know how he gets when he's uncomfortable." I was sitting in my kitchen watching the sunrise paint the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and pink, holding a cup of coffee that cost more than my family used to spend on groceries in a day. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Mom, he called me cheap. After everything I've done for this family, after all the support I've given without asking for recognition, he looked me in the eye and called me cheap." "He's proud of you," she said desperately. "He's just scared. He doesn't understand your world, and when people don't understand something, they sometimes attack it." But I was done making excuses for him. Then he should have asked questions instead of making assumptions. He should have tried to understand instead of judging. The conversation went on for 20 minutes with Mom alternating between defending Dad and begging me to reconsider. When I finally hung up, I felt emotionally drained but oddly relieved. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of their financial security on my shoulders. The reality of what I'd done hit them faster than I'd expected. By Tuesday, Mom called again, this time with panic in her voice. "Sophia, the bank called about the mortgage payment. They said the automatic transfer was canceled, and we're going to be late if we don't get them the money by Friday." "Then you'll need to pay it yourselves," I said simply. "With what money? You know we live paycheck to paycheck. The only reason we could afford the house payments was because—" She trailed off, finally connecting the dots that had been right in front of them for 3 years. "Because I was covering them," I finished. "Along with your car payments, insurance, property taxes, and all those little extras that made your retirement so comfortable." The silence on the other end of the line stretched on until I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice small and broken. "How much were you paying every month?" I did the math in my head. "Including everything, about $4,000 monthly. Sometimes more when you had unexpected expenses." Another long silence. Then barely a whisper. $4,000 every month for 3 years. Give or take. I could hear her crying quietly and my heart clenched. I loved my mother deeply, but I couldn't keep enabling a system that allowed my father to criticize me while benefiting from my success. "We had no idea," she said through her tears. "We thought maybe you helped sometimes, but we never imagined." "I know you didn't. And I didn't want you to know because I wanted to help out of love, not obligation. But Dad made it clear last night that my generosity is worth nothing to him. So now you get to see what life looks like without it." Jessica called that evening, her teacher's voice sharp with anger. "How could you do this to them, Sophia? They're our parents. They raised us. They sacrificed for us." "And I've been repaying that sacrifice for 3 years," I replied calmly. "Every month, without fail, without recognition, and apparently without appreciation. But cutting them off completely, that's cruel. What's cruel is calling your daughter cheap after she's been secretly funding your lifestyle. What's cruel is accepting help and then criticizing the person helping you. What's cruel is never once saying thank you for support that totals more than many people's annual salary." Jessica was quiet for a moment, processing the numbers. "I didn't know you were doing that much. None of you knew because I didn't want credit. I just wanted to help. But help isn't help if it's met with criticism and resentment." Marcus called the next day, and his reaction was completely different. "Holy shit, Sophia! Holy crap! 4,000 a month." "Language," I said, automatically echoing Mom's constant refrain, and we both laughed despite everything. "Seriously though, I had no idea. I knew you were doing well, but I thought maybe you helped with emergencies or whatever. I never dreamed you were basically carrying them financially." "Neither did they, apparently." "And Dad called you cheap." Marcus's voice was incredulous. The man who's been living off your generosity called you cheap for spending your own money on a nice dinner. That about sums it up. Jesus. No wonder you walked out. I would have thrown the watch at his head. It was Friday afternoon when Dad finally called. I was in my office looking out at the city and thinking about how quiet my bank account felt without those automatic transfers going out every month. The money was still there, of course, but somehow it felt different. Lighter. Less burdened. Sophia. His voice was different, smaller somehow. We need to talk. I'm listening. The mortgage payment is due today. The bank called and said if we don't pay by 5 o'clock, we'll be in default. I looked at my watch. It was 4:15. Then you'd better figure out how to pay it. With what? His voice cracked slightly. You know we can't cover it on our own. You managed before I started helping. That was before the property taxes went up, before the insurance increases, before... He trailed off, probably realizing that most of those increases had happened during the years I'd been covering them. Before you got used to living beyond your means, I finished. Another long pause. Then so quietly, I almost couldn't hear it. I didn't mean what I said. Yes, you did. And you know what? That's okay. You're entitled to your opinion about how I spend my money. But you're not entitled to criticize me while spending my money. I didn't know it was your money. You should have asked. You should have wondered. You should have done anything except take it for granted and then attack me for being successful. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Finally, he spoke again. What do you want me to say? I want you to say that you're proud of me. I want you to acknowledge that the lessons you taught me about working hard actually worked. I want you to recognize that instead of becoming spoiled or entitled, I used my success to take care of the people I love. And I want you to understand that calling me cheap was the cruelest thing you could have said to someone who's been quietly supporting your family for years. The line went quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. Then I heard something I'd never heard before in my entire life, my father crying. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry, Sophia. I was wrong. About everything. But some things once broken can't be easily repaired, and some lessons cost more than money to learn. 6 months have passed since that dinner at Le Bernardin, and I'm standing in the same spot in my penthouse where this story began, watching the city lights twinkle in the darkness below. The view is just as beautiful, but everything else has changed in ways I never could have anticipated. My parents lost the house. They tried everything they could think of in those first few weeks. Dad picked up a part-time job at a local tax preparation service, working evenings and weekends during tax season. Mom started tutoring kids after school for extra money. Jessica and Marcus pooled their resources to help with a few payments, but on a teacher's salary and a freelance designer's irregular income, they couldn't sustain the kind of support I'd been providing. The bank foreclosed after 3 months of missed payments. My childhood home, with its beige siding and carefully maintained front yard, was sold to a young family with 2 small children. Dad had to watch from the street as they moved in, probably wondering if those kids would someday grow up to be more grateful than his own daughter. They moved into a small apartment across town, the kind of place Dad would have called perfectly adequate, back when he was lecturing me about living within my means. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen that's barely big enough for 2 people to stand in at the same time. Mom cried when she packed up 35 years of memories into boxes, but she never asked me to help. I think she finally understood that this was the natural consequence of taking someone's generosity for granted. The car went next. Without my monthly payments, they couldn't afford the insurance and registration on top of the loan. They traded it in for an older sedan with high mileage and a few rust spots. The kind of practical vehicle Dad had always insisted was good enough for other people. Dad aged 10 years in those 6 months. The man who had always carried himself with the confident pride of someone who'd built a stable middle-class life suddenly looked like what he was, a retiree living on a fixed income who'd gotten used to comforts he couldn't actually afford. Mom started picking up substitute teaching jobs to make ends meet, going back to work at 62, when she should have been enjoying her retirement. But here's the thing that surprised me: they adapted. Humans are remarkably resilient creatures, and my parents proved that they were tougher than either of us had realized. Dad learned to cook meals that cost less than $10 to feed both of them. Mom discovered that the library had free classes on everything from computer skills to gardening. They started taking walks in the evenings instead of watching cable television they could no longer afford. Jessica and I had several more heated conversations before we found our way back to something resembling a relationship. She came to my apartment one evening in late February, looking exhausted after a long day of teaching seventh graders about the Revolutionary War. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble, settling onto my couch with a cup of tea I'd made her. "I didn't understand what you'd been doing for them all those years." "It's okay. I didn't want anyone to know." "Oh, but that's the problem, isn't it? You were being incredibly generous and none of us knew enough to appreciate it. We just thought things were working out well for Mom and Dad in retirement." She paused, staring into her tea like it might contain answers to questions she was just learning to ask. "Dad's different now," she said finally. Humbled. "He talks about you sometimes, about how hard you must have worked to be able to help them the way you did. I think he's starting to understand that success like yours doesn't just happen by accident." Marcus and I never had a fight at all. In fact, our relationship improved after that night at the restaurant. He started visiting me regularly, and we'd talk about his art, his dreams, his struggles with making a living as a creative person. I began commissioning pieces from him not as charity, but because his work was genuinely good, and I wanted to support his talent. He never asked me to help Mom and Dad, and I respected him for understanding that some bridges once burned take time to rebuild. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday in April. I was working late in my office when my assistant buzzed me. "Ms. Parker, your father is here to see you." I hadn't spoken to Dad since that phone call about the mortgage payment 6 months earlier. My heart started racing as I wondered what could have brought him to my office building dressed in his best suit and looking like he was preparing for a job interview. When he walked into my office, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight and his hair seemed grayer, but there was something different about his posture. He looked less rigid, less judgmental, more human somehow. "Thank you for seeing me," he said, sitting in the chair across from my desk, like he was afraid it might disappear. "I know I don't deserve your time after what I said to you." I waited, not sure what I was supposed to feel or say. "I've been thinking about that night for months," he continued, "about what I said to you, about how I acted, and I've been thinking about all the ways you helped us without asking for anything in return." He pulled out a small notebook, the kind he used to use for balancing his checkbook, and opened it to a page covered in his careful handwriting. "I did the math, Sophia. Over 3 years you gave us more than $140,000. Not loaned, gave, no interest, no repayment schedule, no strings attached." The number hit me harder than I'd expected. I'd never calculated the total before, just paid the bills as they came up. "I called you cheap," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I called you cheap for spending your own money on a dinner to celebrate my birthday while you'd been quietly giving us more money than I made in the best 3 years of my entire career." He closed the notebook and looked directly at me for the first time since he'd arrived. "I was wrong. About everything. About your spending, about your success, about your values. I was small and petty and jealous, and I took out my own insecurities on the daughter who'd been taking care of me without me even realizing it." I felt tears starting to form, but I wasn't ready to let him off the hook completely. Why Dad? Why was it so important to tear me down instead of being proud of what I'd built? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "Because I was scared. Because your success made me realize how small my own life had been. I spent 40 years being proud of living within my means, and then my daughter built something extraordinary and made that pride feel foolish." He looked up at me again, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before: genuine humility. "I should have been celebrating you instead of resenting you. I should have been asking how you did it instead of criticizing how you spent the rewards. I should have been the proudest father in the world instead of the most ungrateful. We talked for 2 hours that day. He told me about the struggles of the past 6 months, about learning to live on their actual income, instead of my subsidies, about the pride he'd swallowed when he had to ask Jessica for help with groceries. He told me about watching Mom work substitute teaching jobs and feeling like a failure as a husband for not being able to provide the retirement he'd promised her. But he also told me about the conversations they'd started having, the ones where they talked about me and my accomplishments with wonder instead of worry. He told me about the newspaper clipping of my Forbes article that Mom had started carrying in her purse, showing it to anyone who would listen. He told me about the pride he finally felt when he thought about his daughter who'd built something amazing from nothing. I didn't restore their financial support that day. Some lessons are too important to shortcut, and I could see that Dad was finally learning things about gratitude and humility that he'd needed to understand for years. But I did something else. I hired him. My company had been growing fast enough that I needed someone to manage our accounting department, someone with experience and integrity who could help us stay grounded as we scaled. Dad had 40 years of experience keeping books, and more importantly, he understood the value of every dollar in ways that would serve us well. He started the following Monday at a salary that was fair but not excessive, earning his way back to financial stability instead of depending on charity he'd never appreciated. Mom went back to retirement, but now it was funded by Dad's work instead of my guilt. We have dinner together once a month now, usually at a nice but not extravagant restaurant that Dad picks and pays for himself. He seems to enjoy the ritual of treating his daughter to a meal, and I enjoy watching him take pride in being able to afford it. The watch is still in my jewelry box, unworn and unappreciated. Sometimes I think about giving it to someone else, but mostly, I keep it as a reminder of the night I learned that love without respect is just another form of exploitation. Our relationship will never be the same as it was before that dinner at Le Bernardin. Too much was said, too much was revealed, too many assumptions were shattered. But in some ways, it's better. It's built on honesty now instead of hidden resentments. It's built on mutual respect instead of unacknowledged dependence. Dad tells people at work that his daughter is the CEO, and I can hear the pride in his voice when he says it. Mom frames every article written about my company and sends copies to relatives I haven't spoken to in years. Jessica brings her students to tour our offices when they're studying entrepreneurship. I learned something valuable from that painful dinner and its aftermath. Success isn't just about building wealth or achieving goals. It's about knowing your worth and demanding that others recognize it too. It's about understanding the difference between generosity and enabling, between helping and being taken advantage of. Some people will always see your success as a threat to their worldview. They'll find ways to diminish your achievements because accepting them would require examining their own choices. And sometimes those people are the ones you love most in the world. But here's what I know now that I didn't know 6 months ago: you can't buy respect with money, no matter how generously you spend it. You can't purchase appreciation with acts of service, no matter how selfless they seem. And you can't earn love from people who are determined to withhold it. What you can do is set boundaries. You can demand to be treated with the dignity your success has earned. You can walk away from relationships that diminish you, even when those relationships feel essential to who you are. Because at the end of the day, the only approval you truly need is your own. And the most expensive lesson you can learn is that your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to see it, even when those people raised you to be everything you became. So here I am, 6 months later, standing in my penthouse apartment that I earned through years of 20-hour days and risks that would have terrified the girl I used to be. The city spreads out below me like a carpet of dreams and possibilities, and I finally feel at peace with the choices I've made. My relationship with my father will never be what I once hoped it would be, but it's become something more honest and sustainable. He works for my company now, earning his place at our family dinners instead of taking them for granted. Mom has stopped making excuses for his past behavior and started making room for pride in mine. Jessica and Marcus understand now that success isn't something to apologize for, and they've both started pursuing their own dreams with more determination. I still believe in taking care of family, but I've learned the difference between support and enablement, between generosity and being taken for granted. I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices, even when those consequences are painful to watch. The watch is still in my jewelry box, a $15,000 reminder of the night I finally stopped trying to buy approval from someone who was determined not to give it. Sometimes I think about selling it, but mostly I keep it as a symbol of everything I learned about knowing my worth. I want to ask you something, and I really want you to think about this. Have you ever found yourself giving more than you're getting in a relationship, whether it's with family, friends, or romantic partners? Have you ever had someone criticize you for the very success that allowed you to help them? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, because I think all of us have dealt with people who mistake generosity for weakness. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences about family success and learning to value yourself. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by other people's ability to appreciate it. Thank you for listening to my story, and for understanding that sometimes the most expensive gift you can give yourself is the freedom to walk away from people who don't value what you bring to their lives. I hope your journey toward knowing your worth is less painful than mine was, but just as ultimately rewarding. Remember, success without respect is just another form of servitude, and life's too short to spend it apologizing for achieving your dreams. Until next time, keep building the life you deserve, and never let anyone convince you that your achievements are anything less than extraordinary.